We just sold Thiago News. Yes. Really happy about that. We like that. We do indeed like that. As you can tell, the feeling of finally selling a player you've been trying to sell forever is quite wonderful. Finally. If you want to see that feeling experienced more often, or certainly in the transfer window we're in right now, you can check out the link in the description to hang out with me on Twitch for my latest Football Manager save there, or you can hang out while I'm playing some other game at some point. Some other game, he says with disdain. Anyhow, we are here today for this video. For one, you to critique the growth of the new beard, and two, to talk about how to sell players that you can't just offer out and sell immediately, which is a situation with players that you find yourself in a lot. In order to do that, I need to show you the save that I was actually just celebrating. And that save is with a club called Oriental Dragon, which at this point you probably know. And we've had the luxury of having some very complicated transfer negotiations throughout the course of this past year. And this has caused me to come up with or unearth a lot of different strategies you can use to offload players, various examples of which we'll be referencing throughout this video. But from what we've discerned, there are three different camps of types of players that you cannot sell. But there is a prerequisite that we need to talk about first, and that has nothing to do with what's going on in this fancy transfer center. Regardless of what amenities they have in the transfer center, we go up to FM and we're going down to add remove leagues, because there's a very important thing that is I'm always holding something. That's important. I need that. But here in the add remove league section, this is going to determine the clubs that you're going to be able to interact with. Now, it is important to note that you can interact with clubs that are not on this list. Like, the most obvious and common example is when you sign somebody from Africa. There'll be players like Aziz Ishtioui, who we signed from the Tunisian league, but then when we start offering him back out again, the only offers that we are getting are from teams in the Tunisian league, which is obviously not loaded. It does prove that you can interact with clubs that aren't actually in your game, but the more leagues that you have loaded as at least view only and more helpfully playable, the more teams are going to be able to make offers for your players. Here's the most common area where this comes in as a problem. If you are in England and you are in Vanarama North South and there are no other actually bad leagues loaded, you're going to have a terrible time unloading players. And this where, like, if you're in League 2, right, and you wanted a super small database because you're playing on a smart toaster, which great idea, but you aren't able to load any other bad leagues, trying to sell your guys in League 2, who are you going to sell them to, right? The clubs that aren't playable in the game, they don't have a lot of money, they don't have a lot of spots in the roster, they aren't thinking a lot. And so there's nobody that's going to obviously come out to try and get those players, because every league in the world is significantly better than you if you just loaded the other top 5 leagues without any leagues below them. I'm not shaming people that aren't loading a lot of leagues. I'm just saying that that can be a reason you could not be able to sell your players. But now into the 3 main reasons that don't fit into that exception, or essentially the 3 main reasons that you would be watching this video. Number 1, no one wants to buy your player. That might sound a little obvious, but there's a big difference between what we're going to talk about later, which is like nobody wants to buy your player for the amount of money that you think they should be buying your player for. I'm talking their value is 2 million and the offers are 300,000, and why that could be and everything else. But what is going on if actually just nobody wants your player? As fortunately we had that happen. We had it happen with Matt Butcher. This is Matt Butcher. He's a perfectly capable player making an unappalling wage of $62,500 per year, which if we play per week, it's just like a little over $1,000 per week. Per month, do your own math, you're weird. Guy played for us for 4 years and was, over the last 2 seasons, a fairly regular feature, especially 2 years ago, in Liga NOS, which is a good league. You've already seen how many leagues I have loaded, so what could possibly be the problem? Why is nobody interested in this guy? Or, as I should say, they weren't interested in this guy until we put on some jujitsu. What it comes down to is the willingness of other teams to scout, the willingness of your player to join those teams, which is shockingly a huge factor. And it's the reason that when you offer somebody out for no money, that a million terrible teams don't show up for that player, because they know that that player, one, they wouldn't be able to pay him, 2, he doesn't want to go there. Butcher's not a mean guy about it. He's not telling all these teams to go away, but the teams aren't even bothering making an offer that would be interested because they know that the Butcher doesn't want to go. He's 29 years old. He played 6 games last year, and he's not an unbelievable player. He's not bad either, and has a home on a second or third flight team in Portugal any day of the week. So the first order of business is to find something like this out. You want to offer a player out. There are 2 thought processes behind this. Both work. You offer a player out for unspecified, or you start at an amount of money, lock it, and continue to work your way down. You can also start at an amount of money, leave it unlocked, which is essentially unspecified but stirring the pot, and whoever is interested can come back with a better offer. And whichever you've done, if it doesn't work, try the other method. Don't ask for an unreasonable amount, or even you can start walking it down, start at 375 and just kind of go to whatever level you're acceptable at to see if it gins up any interest. None of that works. You end up in the situation we're talking about. You've exhausted all of your options with those offers. You want to put the player on the transfer list. Teams are much more inclined to be interested in players that are on the transfer list. It has the double-edged sword of guaranteeing that this player is basically going to leave. It is very weird, awkward, morally, and by morally I mean in terms of your team dynamics, your player dynamics, to get a guy off the transfer list and back into your team. So you need to be sure that unloading this player is what you want to do. And in this case, Butcher's not going to play. I'd rather just have the money and move this guy on and give the minutes to somebody who's going to develop in the future. Thank Matt Butcher for his service. That sort of thing. And so I put him on the transfer list. I leave him on the transfer list for a week or 2. Or maybe even 3 to see if any clubs get interested. Once a week, you set a little reminder on your phone to offer him out again, because the clubs around you and the clubs that know who Matt Butcher is, well, their situation is changing. And every time you click on transfer status, you'll see any potential major or minor interest from clubs. If somebody pops up, you can target your offer out by going to offer clubs, transfer offer, and then going to targets. You then add a specific club that you're proposing to. Say Porto is interested for some reason. I'd type in Porto and then find Porto. Okay, and then go to details and offer them out unspecified specifically to Porto if I think Porto is interested. That's never actually worked for me, but it's just interesting to know that this little targets thing is there. Like, you can specifically offer them out to foreign clubs if you don't want a player staying domestically, or you can exclude clubs of all ilks, rival clubs, foreign clubs, domestic clubs. You know, you get the idea. So you follow all these steps and nothing is working. Well, the only other option that you have, if you really want to unload this player, you've already taken the step and said, I want to get this player off my team. You put them on the loan list. This is also in the transfer status. You can set these percentages at 100% and just kind of let it go. For me, I leave it at 0 just to see what kind of offer I'm going to get. And if you want to gin up the interest, you go to loan offer, set this at 100% so that they're paying 100% of the wage, lock it, and offer to clubs, because then you can at least get the wage bill off your team, give them an opportunity to play, which is either going to raise their value or at very least reduce the pressure on your books. And then you offer them out. If that doesn't work, come in here and unlock these 2 and then offer them out again. If that doesn't work, set this to 0, offer them out, and see if literally anybody is interested, even if they're not paying the wage. If that comes back negative, then you're probably going to have to wait out the contract by leaving them transfer listed and available for loan. You also, at that point, if you're that desperate to get rid of the player, should set the asking price at 0. On transfer list, that should attract some interest. If you get to that point, it's important not to get disheartened, because realities change all the time, and all you need is one team. The instance where you might not get that one team and things get more complicated is our second scenario, which the reason you're clicking on this video is because your players' wages are too damn high. And we have 2 examples of this. Matt Butcher is obviously not one of them. Now, Josh Harrop, who's making $364,000 a year, which divided by 50 roughly is... Oh, he's making about $7,000 a week, something like that. I mean, he's making a really good wage. $1,000 a day, which I could have figured out because that's basically the number of days in a year. But we realized that we wanted to try and get this wage off the books. So what other steps are we going to need to take? Well, one, when you're dealing with the offering players out for transfers, you will immediately be notified that the player's wage is going to be a significant problem in negotiation, because when a player's wage is high, you're going to get transfer offers back where they're asking for selling team salary contribution. This happened with Josh Harrop. Now, what I did, as you're going to see, is I removed and excluded it, which you can do with anything, by the way, in case you didn't know. I removed and excluded it from negotiation, re-offered them out, accepted, and the teams were not able to elevate their offers enough to entice Harrop without the selling team salary contribution. So this lets me know that Josh Harrop does value the amount of money he's making, which honestly, that makes sense. I get it. I'm not going to knock him for getting his cheddar. Fortunately, I was able to go through this experience with not one, but two players. A guy named Park Ji-soo, whose wage, also similarly high, just under $7,000 a week, was prohibitive from him joining the types of clubs that would want to sign him. And with him, you get these pop-ups, as we did offer him out to a couple of clubs. A couple of Polish clubs came back and said yes. But when I accept these offers, Park Ji-soo comes to me and says, I'm going to need you to pay me a bit of money, which is essentially contract compensation, so that I'll take a lower offer. This means that the wage demands are within range. You're going to be able to pull it off, and you negotiate to a monetary threshold you're willing to pay to unload the player, which weirdly enough usually is under the transfer fee that you're going to receive for the player. But this is what I was hoping to get with Harrop, and we obviously didn't. So with Josh Harrop, we went through all the normal loan processes. There's not a lot of people that are interested in paying that kind of wage on loan. We did run into some teams that were enthusiastic about having him on loan, but we're talking 10-20% of the wage, which you get often. So we exercised one of the most valuable assets in this entire process: patience. Football Manager is alive. Everything is changing all the time. Somebody's transfer window is opening. Somebody's transfer window is closing. And so all of a sudden, Perth Glory show up after 3 weeks of trying to unload Josh Harrop, and they are offered $160,000. The thing says that Harrop is willing to go, and it looks like they're going to be able to pay the wage because they're not asking for any selling team salary contribution, so they're anticipating being able to cover the costs. Also, Australia is one of those leagues that overpays players, so they could be able to cover the costs. They fit in the same category as places like China, the United States, Mexico. These are leagues that pay a lot of money for players, and the best Greek teams do this as well. They will pay a higher wage than players mandate most of the time for some reason, so they should be able to meet your demands where most other places can't. England's great for this too. Literally every English tier overpays every one of its players, because we stayed patient. We offered him out again. Perth Glory come back with $160,000. They'll cover his whole wage and bring him over, and the job was done. But sometimes you can't wait, or sometimes in this third scenario that brings you here is you have to kick them out the door. And that is where we found ourselves with the eminently dramatic Thiago Nunes. Not only does Thiago Nunes have fantastic hair, and not only is this guy real with an Instagram of a Greek god, we had perhaps the most long drawn out transfer battle I've ever experienced. You might have noticed when I was talking about Harrop that there was this whole aspect where he wanted to go to Perth. Well, every time you go to a transfer offer to receive it, which you might not have noticed because normally it's not a problem, is that their interest in the team they could potentially go to is actually in the top left. For Thiago Nunes, he didn't want to leave. So here's the hypothetical scenario that wasn't hypothetical. We receive an offer of $2.5 million for a player that we would love to have $2.5 million instead of. So then we reject that offer and offer him out for $3 million to see what kind of offer we are going to get. It's worth mentioning that we noticed that he's not interested. I don't want to hear it. But we figured we'd be able to sell him anyways. He comes back and through the Dynamics Center sends us a notification that he is unhappy to have been touted to other clubs for a transfer, because of course he has. And then when we have this conversation, you are given two options. You can either attempt to convince this player that it was a mistake, or you were just testing the waters, you're not going to release them, in which case you end up in a potentially year-long unhappy to have been touted to other clubs, and so now you promise them not to sell them. Promise, which if you break, all heck breaks loose. So instead, I wanted to convince Noose that it was time to sell. This made Thiago Noose predictably angry, and we entered into a cycle where I, every couple of days, would offer him out. Different clubs would become interested. The club that he was interested in joining, as we continued to anger him, was not the club that he wanted to go to. But at no point did we accept his bullying down to a valuation of 1 million, because at two separate times, as we continue to fight about now he wants to go to this club and I'm not letting him go to this club, I continue to yell at him to persuade him to get into the team. I leave him out of all registration to anger him, which there is no better surefire way to anger somebody than leaving them out of European registration or league registration or moving him to a youth team. We didn't even go there. But our relationship deteriorated rather aggressively. And as it did, these clubs that were interested, he wasn't interested in, because I'm trying to get the most money. He's trying to get the best place to play at. But as much as I feel like I could write a soap opera about Thiago Noose's transfer scandal stuff, what we did was stay patient. But this wasn't the kind of patience with Harp where we just let it be for a week and a half, offered him out again, and then the landscape was different and we were successful. We were on this all the time. Every 2 days, Thiago Noose was in my office, honestly just moaning about, I don't know, his dreadlocks got stuck in the paper shredder again or something. That and the fact that the one club he wanted to move to was the only club interested in him, not offering me $2 million for him. With the whole point in the first place of angering a guy who's got like 150 appearances for me and isn't bad is because I want $2 million, which he just doesn't seem to understand. The audacity. We eventually got to a point where I had angered him so much, eventually he's willing to talk to Portsmouth. We were able to take a player that didn't want to leave at all, that was a highly influential player, and beat down his morale so quickly that he ended up accepting a contract to a team in the English Championship with Portsmouth that he wouldn't have even considered not too long ago. And it was good for him. He ended up making a bunch more money than he made with us. It was the most successful endeavor I've ever had in angering a player into leaving. I honestly don't know, though, if you could push this too far back from that, because you have to know who you can get rid of and who you can't. I was willing to bludgeon Thiago Noose into leaving because I knew there were a bunch of clubs interested in him, mainly because his wage was low and somebody just offered $2.5 million for him off the top. But if I go to my social hierarchy and I see somebody that's way up there like Kean Harries, who's getting paid a pretty significant wage, but there's no team interested in him, and if I offer him out, there's no way he's going to want to leave. Well, then you're stirring up a potential controversy because all of the strategery in the world is probably not going to be able to get Kean Harries off the team. So as enticing as it may be to Thiago Noose, everybody, you have to know when you can do this, and you have to have a healthy dose of caution about when you can't, like a club captain who isn't fantastic. The only thing we haven't mentioned in this video is you can offer players out with a potential optional future fee after matches played, or mandatory future fee, which can be a good way, especially in the first year or two of a save, to delay the payment coming from a club to get a potentially slightly higher transfer deal done with another club if you don't need the money right now. Outside of that, this video has, through experience, covered everything that I know about unloading players that you can't sell. So go forth, sell your driftwood, get them out of your team, bring in the fresh life. And remember, if you loan a guy out for a year and bring him back, try and sell him again. There will be more takers. It's like going back for a second season of The Bachelor.